Hey everyone, this is Edward back again for another philosophical question. I believe we're up to question 6 this time, so making slow but steady progress. And what's the news from Taiwan? Today is cold, so winter is back. Perhaps it was always going to come back. Perhaps it was fated to always come back, because that is our question for today. Does fate exist? So, this question is obviously a little bit similar to some of the other questions I've already answered in the series so far, particularly perhaps the question on is free will real or just an illusion? So you might also want to take a look at that video as well if you haven't already. But given that I am trying this 205 philosophical question challenge, I am certainly not going to skip over something just because it's a little bit too similar or whatever. No excuses, right? Gotta keep trying, keep moving on. I'm trying a new video angle today. Hopefully the camera does not fall down. It seems to shake a little bit if I'm a little bit too aggressive with my actions here. Let's hope it all stays together. If I happen to fall down, or it appears that I have, please trust I'm okay, and I will adjust the camera because I probably cannot be energetic enough to try and edit it out later. So we'll see how it goes. All right. So as I mentioned, there's probably going to be some crossover in my answers in this video with some of my previous videos, but I think we can add a large amount of new things, new thoughts, new problems, new things to get stuck into and get confused about. So, as we often attack, let's start from the simple end. What do we even mean by fate, or how would we define that? So, seems obvious on the face of it, but I think there's probably a whole range of different ways we could actually talk about it. In one sense, we sort of talk about it as, God has fated us or destined us to be something or end up somewhere. Religion always seems to be one of the first answers to a lot of these philosophical questions, doesn't it? But here I think we really do have that sort of strong answer, at least from some parts of religion. Here I sort of think about predestination, a Calvinist idea. But basically, God has already laid out, your path and also determined whether you're going to heaven or hell even, right? Which is either incredibly scary or comforting, depending on your point of view there. Since I guess if you are one of those lucky ones who already has that ticket to heaven, I guess you could be a total ass for the rest of your life and you don't need to worry. Of course, I think most of these Calvinist guys tended to act in a proper way to sort of prove that they were one of the chosen ones. Either way, that certainly could be fate, right? God has said this is what's going to happen to you, and there's no changing fate then, right? Similar sort of religious idea from the Eastern perspective, karma. This one also strikes me as somewhat unfair, perhaps, given that it's possible you're being punished for things in this life, for things you did in the previous life that you don't even remember, right? You don't even, I guess it was you, but not you, right? Because you're being punished in a different form now, or alternatively, you're being rewarded for what you did in a previous life. And you're working your way up or falling back down. And it's all based on previous actions, right? Every action has a reaction. So that one leads us perhaps into the sort of non-religious idea, which is simply every decision you make in life has a consequence, right? So if you want to know why you are where you are now, then simply trace your actions backwards. And you can see that they led you straight to that point. So you could say that that was your fate, right? Nothing could have happened other than what happened because of the choices you made. Whether that was freely made choices or the choices that God or something else put in front of you, a bit unclear, right? taking that a little bit wider, not just the choices that you make, but all the other things that are happening around you, right? Other people's actions, the small things they do, like they bump into you in the hallway, to the big things like getting in a fight, or even bigger things like all the society type things, like there's a war or a natural disaster. These are things that you are certainly not choosing to happen, but are happening to you, and perhaps were unavoidable, right? They were your fate. It was your fate to be in World War II, right? Or your fate to get blown up in World War II. So certainly those things, those big events at least, or perhaps every event, no matter how small, is affecting you. Another possible part of this is to go very, very small, right? And to go very, very far back in time. And we can say every little thing, right down to the atoms bumping into each other, are all working together to create the situation you're in now. And you want to know why you got there? Well, you're going to go all the way back to the beginning of time, right? Or perhaps even before the beginning of time, right? Whatever that means. But I guess there had to be something, or something unknowable, but something certainly happening there that created the situation, the Big Bang, or whatever you believe if you're not into the scientific viewpoint. But we could trace that series of events, right? This atom bumped into that atom, and then a billion years later, another atom bumped into an atom, and then another billion years and billion years and billion years, and then here I am with all the atoms bumping into me still, and I am stuck, right? They have brought me to this point in front of this camera at this moment, playing with my pen, and I could have done nothing else. I was fated to be here because of those things. You can see in a way that even the way we're talking about fate so far really does fall into that category of like, are we talking about free will as well? Right? If all those atoms and things bumping into each other are what got me to where I am now, and all the events, previous to this moment are why I am here, did I have any sort of freedom, any free will, any freedom of choice? Or was I always going to end up here? So you can sort of start thinking, well, is by fate, do we just mean cause and effect, right? If we take it out of the religious point of view, right, because I think that one is fairly straightforward, and you either believe that or you don't. But for the rest of us, cause and effect, right? Take it all the way back to that Big Bang, the Big Bang, blah, blah, blah. I am here sipping my tea, right? Grass tea today. If you're from Taiwan, you'll know what grass tea is. Other people, if you're not sure what it is, it's actually very tasty. It doesn't taste like grass in the way that you probably think. Very healthy though. Let's see. So cause and effect makes sense, right? I drop the pen, it bounces, it falls on the floor, someone trips on the pen, right? We can trace that all the way back to me dropping the pen, right? He fell because I dropped the pen. Even though there's multiple things in the middle, perhaps, we could trace it back to that moment. Of course, the question is, how far do we trace it back, right? Like I said, you could trace it back to that beginning of time, the Big Bang, or perhaps even before that. Of course, we're not certain what's before that. But you could trace it back ad infinitum, right? Forever. And I don't know if that's particularly helpful, right? Is it helpful to say, well, you're doing that because of the Big Bang? Perhaps that's scientifically true. Can we say, as sort of a corollary of that, you are doing that because the Big Bang made you do that, or because, the fate that was created by that moment of the Big Bang is why you did that? Sounds like a big statement somehow, right? That we are just here because of that cause and effect. And as a side note that I find kind of interesting right here is, if it is cause and effect, right? Like I said, I drop the pen rolls off the table onto the floor, the guy walks past, slips on the pen, falls down. We can trace that back, right? But is it possible to look forward, right? I drop the pen, I see it fall on the floor, And I can kind of make a prediction, perhaps, about the future based on what's happening now. This is sort of the big dream, right? Could we predict the future based on, our analysis of the present and the past, the recent past, or even deeper into the past, depending, I guess, on what we're trying to predict. As tempting as this sounds, right? I think there's probably too many factors at play here. Perhaps on the small sort of thing, right? I can make predictions. Certainly, if I drop my pen in a crowded hall, right, or a crowded hallway with lots of people walking about, it's not that much of a difficult prediction to say someone is going to slip and fall because I dropped my pen. But could I sort of extrapolate out from there to say, well, because that person fell, World War III happened, right? I think that is the type of prediction that we will probably struggle to make anytime soon. Right? The types of things that people often talk about here are things like chaos theory, right? Which is essentially, I guess, these things are so complex it becomes impossible to see what's happening, right? I guess the famous example is like the butterfly flaps its wings and there's a typhoon or a hurricane across the world. But to get back to fate, right? Why did the butterfly flap its wings? And did it have a choice? Well, another way of looking at this that you often hear is people say, well, look at quantum mechanics, right? And people say if you go down to that very, very small thing, you have this idea of kind of the uncertainty principle, right? You don't know where things are going to be, and you can affect them perhaps by measuring them or interacting with them. Highly complicated, right? But whatever this really tells us, and there are some intriguing things, maybe intriguing philosophical ideas here about what it means to say that these types of atomic sized things are somewhat inherently unpredictable. That doesn't really scale up as far as we know, right? We can't apply that idea to our own lives and say, well, we can somehow extrapolate that we have freedom of choice, or we can act in unpredictable ways in the same sense as what we're talking about at that micro scale. As far as I know, as far as I've seen, there's no way you can say, okay, because of this thing, we can say it's happening at our level. So I think we can brush that aside, right? Quantum mechanics, very interesting, certainly check it out, but probably don't apply it to your life in any sense. So don't say, this says I am either a master of my own fate or fate is doing something. So let's see, what else can we do here? Actually, I mentioned free will a few times, right? And there's that crossover, but perhaps an interesting sort of twist that I was thinking about earlier was that if you tell people that fate exists, for a lot of them, they might say, well, what can I do? I just give up then, right? I don't have any freedom. Things will just happen no matter what. So there is a sort of giving up involved in saying fate exists. Whereas if you say free will doesn't exist, people also say, I give up, right? Why try if free will doesn't exist? So if we say fate exists, people give up. And if we say free will doesn't exist, people give up. It's kind of an interesting sort of dichotomy perhaps there. I don't know if that actually tells us anything deeply of interest, but it is kind of a nice little twist on those two somewhat similar ideas, right? That we are reacting to them in quite different ways. So what else can we say about fate? Well, one other thought I had was this idea of fate sounds very self-centered, I guess, right? It's very much focused on the individual, right? I have a fate, right? Everything perhaps has a fate. It's a strange thing somehow to say, right? There is this sort of self-importance to the idea. And you can see it in a way because we don't really talk about the fate of inanimate objects. I mean, there's no reason we couldn't, right? This is the fate of the table. This table I have here was fated to be in my house. Grammatically, that makes sense, right? But often we don't talk about it that way. So it seems that when we use the word fate, we are talking about it in a kind of human-centric way. And I don't see why that should really be the case. I mean, if we were going to talk about fate, then we should talk about the fate of everything. But it does still ring of that idea that everything had been leading up to that moment in a way, right? The fate of the table, right? The whole universe was here to create the fate of the table. Sounds odd. It sounds somewhat laughable, right? But to go back to my sort of simpler idea of cause and effect, clearly this is happening, right? Is that what people often mean by fate? I don't think it is, right? I think fate is more of a philosophical concept. I think it is often tied to those religious ideas. You know, whether it was that like predestination or karma, that is often how we talk about fate, right? It is somehow a magical idea. When we talk about free will, that one is more of a, I suppose we could almost say like a practical idea, right? Are we making decisions or not, right? Are we making free decisions, free choices or not? Fate is sort of like the story that has been given to you, an outside story. Because I think that is really how we think about it, right? Fate is our story. And that is probably not the way the world works, right? The way the universe works. It's certainly the way that we as humans think about things, right? We think about things as stories. So in this sense, it is sort of a way of looking back on our past and trying to see the story of our lives. And so in that sense, we can see our fate only up until the moment of the present, right? As I kind of said, you know, there's no way we're predicting the future based on this. Whereas I suppose if fate was a more concrete concept, we would be able to predict the future to a certain extent, perhaps. But I think fate does have some elements of comfort to a lot of people, right? That when you look back on your life story, you may feel happier knowing that things could have turned out no different than they are now, right? And that perhaps you are exactly where you are supposed to be. That sounds like a comforting idea. It may be a false comfort, right? You know, in many ways, I think the universe is quite random, right? Where are we going? Where have we been? It seems quite random. As I mentioned before, in the free will thing, you know, there's a lot of things happening in our minds that we are not aware of. You know, where are our thoughts coming from, right? It seems sort of random when they pop out, right? Or when they don't pop out. Like when I try to remember the name of some movie I just watched last night. Like, I know it, but it's not coming out, right? Everything seems a little bit out of control sometimes. So, do we make our own fate? I suppose is another way of looking at this. That one definitely ties to the question of free will, right? And if you remember from that video, in summary, I basically said, you probably have some level of free will depending on the situation, perhaps, right? This is very, very unclear still. But it seems perhaps in certain situations you have what I call sort of limited free will, right? Certainly a whole bunch of factors created the situation that I found myself in. But perhaps I can make a somewhat free decision in that situation. Maybe, right? But perhaps a lot of that is at least happening within your own mind, right? So perhaps that will give you some comfort that there is some level of control, even if you're not aware of it, inside you. Of course, the alternative is to say, well, What does that mean? If you can't control it, it's not really a helpful thing for you to tell me. So, is there fate? Well, to go back to the beginning, if we're talking about fate as religion, unless you believe that, I think we're going to have to say no, right? Is your life somewhat predetermined? Yes, but only if you are thinking about cause and effect, right? Is it random? Yes. But only perhaps random in your own mind, right? Because you are not fully certain where things are coming from. If we were able to trace everything back, I think we could see the path no matter what we were thinking about. So, is there fate? No. Probably that is the direct answer there. It's nice to give a direct answer for once. No fate. But cause and effect, right? You are stuck, right? You are not free in the sense that you probably think you are. But fate as that lovely story about your life, or perhaps the punishment story if it's karma, that's not what we're talking about. Okay? So that one's a fairly short one today, and pretty good, I think. Let me know what you guys think. And certainly check out my free will video where I took on that idea on a deeper level. And check out any of my other videos and let me know what you think, or let me know if you have any questions. Please subscribe, like the video, or do whatever. Okay? And I'll talk to you guys next time.